Explain how climate change is affecting modulating these challenges and issues in our local environments here in the East Bay.
Flooding. Flooding is really the biggest issue.
We didn't used to be able to launch our kayak from our backyard, but there are absolutely times now that we can launch our paddleboard or our kayak right from our backyard, and we don't have to come over here.
It just floods. Like you can't go down that road because it will flood going further downtown. You have to loop around. So whenever there's high rains, it will flood.
We want to make sure that we don't lose our neighbors.
Go out to Jaelyn Park with a measuring tape, and just open the measuring tape up to 12 feet and understand that's going to be the level of the water twice a day in the year 2100.
Warren, Rhode Island is a town extremely vulnerable to climate change. The state's smallest waterfront town is flanked on 3 sides by tidal bodies of water: the Kickemuit River, Belcher Cove, and the Palmer River. The town sits on average just 7 feet above sea level, and large parts of it are even lower than that. Periodic flooding during heavy rains and storm surges have always been a normal part of coastal life in the Ocean State, but the next several decades could see these risks worsen significantly.
The projections are grim. It's 30 years from now. That's just 3 decades from now, They're really imagining that if we got hit by some bad storms, we'd really have some loss.
The data makes it clear. The clock is ticking. So what could this mean for the town, its residents, and the local ecosystem? And what, if anything, can be done to mitigate or even prevent the worst of the impacts? This is a film by students of Mount Hope High School. In search of answers to these questions, we spoke to residents, experts, and organizers working in Warren and Rhode Island's East Bay. There was one clear place to start: a roughly 170-acre, dense area centered on Belcher Cove and Market Street. Because this area is so close to this tidal body, the town projects that parts of Market Street will see a foot of water during high tides by 2035, and another 3 feet of water during high tides by 2050. In other words, it's ground zero for climate impacts in Warren. Given the density in this area, losing this part of the town could be a socioeconomic and ecological disaster for the town.
And what we know about the Market Street area in Warren is that there is already flooding, and there is a projection for increased sea level rise, increased extreme weather, rainier weather, that kind of thing.
It's always been a wet area, if you will, and so periodically a storm would come around and the streets would flood a little bit and making it difficult for traffic to get through. But the incidence, the number of times that those kinds of storms are coming in and creating that kind of flooding is increasing, and the quantity of precipitation is also increasing. Compound that with some of the issues of sea level rise. As some of these storms come up, there's surge and a higher rise in the sea level, which is starting to impact municipal services like the Jaelyn Park. Homes in the area are starting to get flooded more frequently, which is causing problems for individual property owners, and there is a smattering of businesses in the area that are getting affected as well.
Those living closest to Belcher Cove already deal with regular nuisance flooding. As the static sea level rises and storms worsen, the frequency and severity of flooding will too. What those residents experience today is a preview of what their neighbors inland can expect in the future. We spoke to Juliet Castleman, who owns a home within sight of Belcher Cove.
My name is Juliet Castleman, and I've lived here for 10 years at this house, and I lived on Child Street for 8 years. I would say that this general area, since I moved here about 18 years ago, it has been very floody, especially on Child Street. We had huge floods, but that was mainly because we had extraordinary rainfall, and but I think that's just something that's going to keep on happening, these kind of bigger, huge things. I noticed the water would constantly flood down the end of the road, which is right off of where Market Street is. And that's where a lot of water comes. And then when we get any kind of rainstorm, it'll start coming down the road like we're part of the tidal area because it just slowly floods. Every house around here has a sump pump, and you have to have flood insurance, which will make some people leave because it's so high. We have one, and we always have to dump our dehumidifier and check our sump pump like just naturally. And then every time it rains, you know it's going to come. So you start to realize that it's not just your kids, it's actually me as an old person, and then my kids as young people. So it isn't so far, and I think because of Rhode Island is the ocean state, and we are at that location where those two types of water kind of converge, we'll be those early climate change refugees. I feel like there's something hanging over us, and I would like to move, but I'm not really fiscally able to at the moment. Yeah, I was joking that since I'm in a brick house, I'd be fine, it's brick, but I would have no potable water or electricity or anywhere to go. I'd probably get a little boat and a little gondola and roam around like it's Venice, but it wouldn't actually be a livable state. I feel like we're at the dam and it's already got a hole, and it's got another hole and another hole and another hole, and there's only so many fingers and only so much tape that it can stop it from coming out. Yes, we would all like to stay where we want to stay. We want our kids to go through the school system they want to go through, that they started with, the lovely little town full of culture and all the wonderful things, but you can't have that if you don't have a safe place to live.
The town expects this area to become completely uninhabitable by the year 2100. That is beyond most of our lifetimes, but it will not take anywhere near that long for the neighborhood to become economically unviable. As water creeps into the neighborhood over the next several decades, insurers will begin to raise rates and could even refuse to insure homes that are regularly sustaining damage. Mortgage lenders, which typically deal in 30-year loans, will also think twice about lending on properties that will lose value over that loan. This financial uncertainty, along with the nuisance of flood impacts today, is already affecting potential home buyers.
My name is Kristen Blackbeard, and I have been living here for 16 years. It'll be 17 years in November.
Are you able to point out where you live here?
Yeah, I live actually just through all of these reeds across the water. Something that I'm very aware of as my husband and I are looking to buy a home, most mortgages are 30 years. And Warren in particular, because it's so low-lying, is a place that's really heavily at risk of losing a lot of our landmass due to sea level rise. In particular, the neighborhood we live in already floods basically every time it rains, especially right here behind Belcher's Cove. Every time it rains, our backyard itself floods. It's almost like we have our own swimming pool or lake in our backyard every single time it rains because we're right on the marsh. A lot of the homes struggle to get flood insurance or insurance. So we know that Warren, even though as much as we love living here, there are very few areas that if we're getting a 30-year mortgage, those areas won't potentially be underwater in 30 years. There have been many occasions where we can't leave our neighborhood when there's really heavy rain. The cross streets right across the street from us at Market and Mason, every time it rains, it floods at that crossing street quite badly. So if you aren't in an SUV, it's very hard to get through that intersection. Also, right here where the Belcher's Cove kind of goes under the road at Jaelyn Park, right at Market Street, that tends to flood if it's high tide and it's rain. There are a lot of times where this neighborhood itself, when there's a lot of heavy rain, becomes completely impassable and you can't leave your own neighborhood because of flooding. I'm concerned living in this area that it's unsustainable. There's absolutely going to become a point where it's just not realistic to continue living here, where it's not going to be possible. We're parking our car in our driveway won't be possible anymore because our driveway will be consistently flooded, or there will always be an inch or two of water in our basement. So there will be a tipping point at some point where it's just not possible to continue to live on Belcher's Cove. I don't know if that day is in 5 years or if that's in 15 years, but it is coming because the water does continue to get worse with every storm, every year. We have to plan to move. That's just something we know we have to go somewhere else. And again, we want to buy a home. We want to buy a home that's not at risk. of, being underwater somehow in 30 years. And where is that going to be? And is that going to be in Warren? We don't know right now. And that's, I think, unfortunate because we love it here.
Seeing that these climate impacts are effectively unavoidable in the Market Street area, town administrators, planners, and consultants developed a bold plan for the neighborhood's future. Proactively retreat from the area before flooding forces property owners, renters, and business owners out. This involves buying out property owners before their property values tank.
They recognized that the Market Street neighborhood was in this, had greater risk, right? And to what we see as the progressing sea level rise and the impacts of climate change. And so they very progressively put together this idea that they would strategically manage a retreat. And so in this case, purchase properties at a competitive rate and slowly but surely sort of rewild some of those areas to create a greater buffer for more of the neighborhoods.
So what the town has been working to do is putting a plan together, again, trying to carry out, at least by the year 2100, a managed withdrawal from the area, which essentially is at some point at its apex would be the water's going to be turned off. There's not going to be sewer collection anymore. The state isn't going to be doing any roadway improvements on state highways, and the same thing with the Department of Public Works. They're going to stop doing improvements because it's not worth the investment to see an additional 7 or 12 feet of water every single high tide in that particular area. So the idea is to manage themselves out of that area, work collaboratively with with the residents and the businesses and other uses that may be going on in there to essentially move out of that area as gradually in phases, and then allow that area to just naturally become marshland or whatever from that standpoint.
The town also wants to replace the lost housing and commercial space elsewhere in town. So planners put together a mixed-use rezoning plan for an underutilized but higher elevation and safe part of Metacom Avenue. This gives the plan its name, Market to Metacom. The rezoning will allow the development of housing, commercial, and green space in this area. The town adopted this Market to Metacom plan as part of its larger town planning document, the Comprehensive Plan. It was several years in the making, but received its final state approvals last year, allowing the town to begin to pursue the plan in earnest, along with the funding to realize it.
We want to move away from the market area and move toward the Metacom area. That area right now is not very livable. It's pretty ugly. It's not pedestrian friendly. There isn't good landscaping, and there isn't a lot of housing there from that standpoint. So there are changes that need to occur within the structure of Warren, such as its community plan, the bylaws, meaning the regulations that regulate development in the area to allow for that kind of development to occur, including at higher density and higher heights. And the whole thing behind that is to connect with those folks that are likely going to be flooded out, for lack of a better term, in the future. And the way that it is the way that the town sees it is sort of like a family. They don't want to just hand them, say, their $250,000 check and say, thank you, good luck, and then take over the house. They would like to be able to buy out the house, but afford that person the opportunity to remain living in Warren should they choose to.
If we were going to lose a neighborhood, lose residents, and even lose taxes, we knew we needed a receiving area. So that's where Metacom Avenue, what could we do to turn what is by and large a very industrial, commercial sort of area, how can we make that more mixed use, create a new neighborhood? And so, that was a very progressive plan and ambitious plan. And I think the comprehensive plan reflects sort of aspirationally what they'd like to see happen. That we are in a moment where funds for moving houses that are in an in an area that might be impacted by weather. We're in a point where those FEMA dollars don't exist in the same way. There's a lot of reorganizing that's happening in the way grants are happening. However, I believe that the town and residents are sort of pivoting, right? So an example of resiliency, well, if we can't get to these components first, let's work on the Metacom Avenue area where there is some real attention to creating new housing in Warren, which we need already. And if we were going to lose any more housing, we'd really need to be ahead of the game.
The concept of managed retreat or managed withdrawal has been around since the 1990s, but gained traction following the devastation of Hurricane Sandy in New York and New Jersey. Several towns in that area implemented buyout programs, but Market to Metacom is among the first plans in practice nationwide that includes a new development component to replace what's being lost. It cannot be the only response. In the meantime, the town and other groups like Reed's Warren Health Equity Zone are working to assist residents and businesses in the Market Street area across Warren today.
To boast about the Warren has supported safety and community resilience work, we actually partnered with the town to complete some surveys to create locations and a platform where people can find out more about flooding. And all of those pieces go towards FEMA, I think it's FEMA, has a community rating system, and the more things that we can put in place, perhaps we can even lower insurance costs. So, sump pump, does everybody have a sump pump? Could we find grant money? So there's all these small steps that I think help in the moment while we're waiting for something as big as some of those elements from the comprehensive plan to be put in place. The town of Warren actually has relied heavily on committees for a long time. All those town council members are volunteers and the committee members are volunteers, and so we need people to step up and participate in this process. The Tree Commission has just recently, in the last month or so, worked with the town to plant 50 trees. And trees are purifying air. They're helping with heat, because heat is another problem that's coming with climate change. We have areas that have greater heat, and then also their infrastructure, right? So their shade, their purification, but they're also a place where you can store water. So the more trees that we could have and green as opposed to concrete, is a message that's getting out there. And I think that's on the strength of committees. I feel like there are still people who need more education, more information. This is really intimidating science, and the technical aspect. But we can't just leave it to another generation to take care of. We can't put our heads in the sand. And so how to meet people where they're at, even if they don't like the terminology climate change, or they might think it's from another reason, I think we can see the evidence already that that places are flooding more regularly, that there's more storm water. And so what are the small steps that we can take? How do we adapt, and how do we mitigate at the same time? I think all these committees and commissions and everything, are working on connection. And one of the best indicators of people's health or people's ability to withstand an emergency like a hurricane or a flood event or fire, that kind of thing, is connectivity. And so I think, the HES and all these committees and commissions are working on that. Connectivity is going to be how we make sure that we've taken care of our neighbors and we haven't left anybody behind.
This work can't happen fast enough. A devastating storm could be right around the corner. Even at today's tide levels, a so-called 100-year flood, which has a 1% chance of happening annually, would inundate the majority of the Market Street project area, with Market Street, a portion of Child Street, and many properties in the area under 5 to 15 feet of water, according to town's data. That would not be unprecedented. Narragansett Bay surged to that level during the hurricane of 1938, which devastated Warren and other communities across the Northeast. The storm killed more than 250 people in Rhode Island alone. Remarkably, only one Warren resident was killed, but contemporary accounts from the Warren Times-Gazette describe harrowing rescue missions across town, including a prolonged effort on Main Street flooded by 4 feet of water. Similar storms have come since, like Hurricane Carol in 1954, although Warren has been spared the worst of their effects. A storm of that magnitude today would likely be even worse. The measured sea levels in Providence is up 5 inches since the mid-1950s, but mitigation measures could help. It is impossible for small communities like Warren to completely stop sea level rise, but projects like Market to Metacom and the restoration of the Kickemuit River can actually prevent damage by allowing impermeable space to become floodwater absorbent wetlands again. Similar projects are in the works across the East Bay region. All of these communities could lose land and housing and suffer ecological damage as sea levels rise and storms worsen. Any hopes of mitigating damage are exponentially improved through collaboration across the region. Sarah Churgan is the district manager for the Eastern Rhode Island Conservation District. She says that collaboration and coordination is necessary if Bayside communities hope to mitigate the impacts of climate change.
Partnership is just so key in order for us to be able to combat climate change moving forward. Warren is in the middle of Bristol and Barrington, and so there are no borders to water. It's just the flooding is just going to go straight through. So all of the town councils have to work together, the residents have to work together to find a common way in which to combat this, or there's not going to be a solution. People have to work together, and this I'm saying people need to be able to talk across the aisle. So the only thing political I'll say, Republicans and Democrats being able to come together in ways to figure out how we're going to solve this. Because as much as people want to stay in their neighborhoods, I don't know that that's possible with the erosion that's happening. And so something has to happen. We have to figure something out, and we have to do it together. The town council has to work with the residents, then working with the state politicians and up the chain. It's working together, it's cooperating. A lot of our projects have to do with trying to figure out how we can mitigate the effects of flooding. So part of one of the projects that we have is, it's in Newport, it's at Elizabeth Brook Watershed, which is in the north end. And it is trying to daylight the brook, which means making the brook, like the brook used to flow freely through Newport, and through urban development, the brook has disappeared. So we are trying to bring the brook back. And that will enable us to be able to help with a lot of flooding in the neighborhood. But a huge part of that project is habitat restoration. So being able to bring the fish back, being able to have a habitat for birds, having a habitat for butterflies, having a habitat for bees. We have here at the farm, we have a pollinator habitat, which is enormous for butterflies and bees. There are rare bees that have been discovered here. So URI is doing a study here. So habitat is just incredibly important to allow us to continue to exist, cohabitate. I think in this past year, people are getting it, especially people who live right on the water. People are experiencing the effects of flood. It's not just stormwater runoff, it is outright flooding. You can't drive through a street, or you can't get into your driveway, or your entire lawn has disappeared. So when it becomes that personal, people, whether they say, oh yeah, so I guess that person was saying something correct about, climate change, or it's like, oh, there's a problem right now and we need to change it. I think people are much more aware of it. Again, being coastal, people who are smack dab, like in the Midwest, don't get me wrong, they're obviously having their own issues, types of things, but unless you're immediately affected by this, and I don't care how self-aware you are, you hear about it, but then you're in your own little world, so it's like, oh, okay, there was a monsoon, but we're having hurricanes much more frequently, and they are, grossly affecting us. we can't turn climate, I mean, we could turn climate change back a bit if we, people were doing things that were more eco-friendly. And so that's a lot of things that Eastern District does, is teaching people about best management practices, but it has to happen on a very, very large scale. It starts one person at a time. It starts with you guys, with the events that you do. It starts with outreach events that we do, and continuing to do that and continuing to do that. But again, it needs a lot of money. So unfortunately, we lost some federal funding, so some of our programs are cut. And so it's figuring out alternative ways to be able to do that. Finding partners, other nonprofits, so that we're not just working in silos, that we're working together to address problems. You guys, you just gotta save us. That's all I gotta say. I'm doing my best, but yeah. Gotta pass the torch. Like, I'll die doing this. There's no question. I will. But, yeah. It's a lot of work and but it's so necessary.